Okay, thanks, Emma, and welcome everyone to this lunch today. It's my first lunch, so with you guys, so really looking forward to the interaction. My style of presenting is to take questions as they pop up in your head. So whack them on the chat box, and one of the people looking after this presentation will signal to me that there is a question. So it's not a huge amount of slides. I'd rather have the discussion and get people talking about what our findings are and whether they will apply to your market and where you're operating. So you've already heard a little bit about my biography. I won't go there again, but if you want to check us out, you can always just go and visit our website to get a bit more detail. So today's presentation is all about making the most of the business development resources that create the employer solutions that you offer to employers, making sure that we develop these people, we create a career path for them to want to stay in the industry, and also we help their leadership sort of make sure they're looking after them like they are the assets of your business as they truly are. So we've learned over the years in Australia and New Zealand where we operate that there are some outstanding people who can do this job really well in crafting these employer solutions, and they often fly under the radar. They don't often get the recognition they deserve, and consequently they move on in their careers to other sectors, and the whole sector misses out on their great skills, which is a great shame. So one of the ways we're going to talk to you about is constantly developing these people, giving them the support they need to want to stay with your organization and within the sector, which is a major challenge all around the world. Okay, so let's go through the agenda. Firstly, we're going to talk about some of the challenges that the whole industry faces globally in terms of attracting and retaining employer engagement talent or employer solutions talent, particularly during this challenge of this post-COVID sort of era of labour and skill shortages. Secondly, we'll talk a lot about what Australian and New Zealand organisations are doing. And what they're doing is they're evolving from this like train to gain with certain pain type model where they whack people through a training course, hope for the best, and then half of the people that did the training have left the organization within 6 months because they just didn't get that ongoing support that they were looking for to refine their skills that they've just learnt. And now they're moving to this notion of treating these crucial people as true assets in the company, and you can almost quantify the value they bring to your organization, both in dollar terms as well as in other terms. And so when this is done well, retention goes through the roof. And we've got some statistics I'll quote later on that. And also, when you've got this really good talent, you can actually convert that potential into real real talent, and they get the results. So we'll speak about that as well. And finally, a couple of case studies. We'll talk to you about what we've done in both the disability employment sector as well as the more mainstream employment sector, where two organisations we work with were in dire straits, almost about to lose their contracts with government. And one of the things they addressed, or they recognized they needed to address, was the sales and marketing to employers. And then that also went on to help with their retention issues as well. Okay. So we know from research that there's three critical things that are emerging in the literature around people wanting to, learn that's something relevant for their careers. And one of the first things, the obvious things that comes to mind is that people want to stay up to date. They want to know the latest contemporary way of creating employer solutions, for example. What is the best practice or the good practice approach that does actually work? What can I learn from others that have done this before quite well? Equally, the people who they report to also want to build up their skills, because a lot of the time they've come through in their career as fantastic job coaches, great with job seekers, getting them motivated and working on their barriers, but they've never actually done the employer solutions role. So there's a potential deficit there in their leadership skills. They might be great site managers and really good at motivating the rest of the team, but when it comes to the employer solutions person, they're kind of a bit lost about what to do, how to coach and provide that feedback. And they recognize that they've got a role to help their would-be superstar people assets to develop in their careers. Secondly, a lot of people are looking for a very personalized approach. So not a one size fits all. And your traditional learning methods where you throw everyone in a room for 2 days to learn the latest way to, undertake business development, where you have some people who are way past that level and want to move on to a higher level, and others that are totally green and totally overwhelmed with all this content. Well, that's not great. It's a lot of money you go spending, not just for the training itself, but also getting people into that room. They've got to travel from different places. There's downtime, etc. So people are wanting a much more personalized and sort of tailored experience that recognizes where they are on their journey to become a master of the art of employer solutions. So when that's done well, we see retention grows by twice as much as when it's not done well. So that's a critical stat for you to think about. And finally, I entered this industry, and I've met so many new consultants in the last couple of years in particular that come out of travel industry, come out of retail, telecommunications, you name it. They've been tradies, they've been all sorts of different things. And one of the appeals of this industry is that they think it's great for their career. They think they're going to have a fabulously long career in this sector. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made such a big jump from another sector potentially. But more often than not, they realize there's a very short career path in many cases. So leading organizations are now recognizing this and saying, well, what can we do to encourage these guys, these really good assets, to stay with us and keep developing them into different roles? And maybe becoming the site team leader is not the ideal role for your superstar employer solutions person. Okay. Once again, you can stop me as we talk. So I guess one of the really passionate things we're constantly talking to our clients about, and government and anyone else who wants to listen, is that we've got to do better to attract and retain talented B2B, business to business teams, people who can do it well. And it's time that this whole notion of this being a revolving door for people with those skills, it's time for that to stop. And we've got to start to address those issues that I've just spoken about. So let me just pause there for a moment and talk to you about a fella called Ted. We call him Ted. His real name's something else, but just to hide his identity, because everyone would love to have Ted in their business. Ted was a Vietnamese immigrant. He came to Sydney in Australia in 2005 with very limited English, but a passion for helping people with a disability. He settled in the area of Sydney where there's a lot of migrants like him, and he wanted to use this new role he got as a disability employment consultant to partly to increase his English skills, as well as to give back to his new country in the role he had. And he was incredibly curious, and one of his curiosities, natural curiosity, and his way with people, his easy way of building rapport with employers and asking about their business and how we might be able to help them, led to him developing over 250, it's not a typo, 250 employer relationships in which he could offer his clientele access to for a job. So he had that many companies that he had to have a special filing cabinet set up with color-coded files for every single industry that he had relationships with. And within each industry, he had easily 3 or 4 companies that he could easily refer any new customer that walked in his site. He could refer them straight down to that employer, and they would be given a chance to meet the employer straight away. So this is the kind of person we believe is out there in the community or in your business right now that, given the right tools and the right techniques, can become another TED. And that's our, I guess, our mantra, that let's find these TEDs and let's develop them, give them a career, and let them blossom and shine in your companies. So when you're entering this industry in terms of a career, typically you're going to get an entry-level role, right? So your role as an employer solutions person is to go out there and engage employers and build relationships, put people into work, support them in work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's your classic entry-level role. So from a learning point of view, you need the basics. You need the ABC of how to do employer solutions. So that's what we call effective employer engagement. And the word effective is really important. You can look really busy in this sector and get nowhere. You could spin your wheels with the wrong employers, putting people into the wrong jobs, et cetera, and it burns relationships left, right, and center. But to do it effectively, you need a framework and you need a way of doing work that we know works. And that's what we think is very useful for someone who's just entering the industry for the first time. Then you want to be able to take the talent that you've got in that first group of people that you just trained and develop them with a bit of extra coaching and mentoring. So what does coaching actually mean in practice? Well, if you've got the opportunity, you go out with these people and see them in action with employers. And you might run one of the meetings for them and then back off and let them run the next one and jump in if you need to because they're getting a bit off track or whatever, or they've got a few knowledge gaps. But after a while, you're becoming the observer rather than the speaker. And after each employer call, you're giving them a bit of a coaching moment session in the car or at the cafe in between appointments. But unless you're actually out there with your consultant, it's really hard to provide that on-the-job coaching. Mentoring, on the other hand, is potentially putting them in front of a more senior, experienced business developer or someone that's been around a while, has done this really well, and is seen as a bit of a role model in your company, and giving them some really personalized attention that might be addressing a skill deficit, or it might be a motivation issue. Maybe they're losing confidence, but they've got the skill, their confidence is getting battered. And it's just usually 1 or 2 things you want to get into their head to try differently each week. And the mentoring might take 4 or 5 weeks before it starts to see a lot of traction. But believe me, it does work. And we've seen some amazing results in doing some mentoring here. We had another disability consultant who had not placed anyone for about 4 months in his role. And it was a small country town in the outback of WA, not a very big location. And this guy was sweating. He thought he was going to get the boot anytime soon. And after a bit of mentoring, he actually tripled his placements. Tripled. So the rest of his peers were getting, 3 or 4 placements a month. He was getting 9 to 12 within a couple of months of that mentoring. So, and it was all about his confidence and motivation. He had the skill, but he just didn't have that other part, the other facet of the role that he needed to translate the skill into results. So once you've mentored and coached, then you should be looking for more strategic opportunities to put these individuals in front of. So middle to larger companies that they could start to develop some more strategic business development skills with. And these companies might also have a diversity policy and things like that, so they can leverage those kind of relationships. And then it gets a bit more complicated because you're not just dealing with the local employer in your local area, you've got potentially a national relationship that you're starting to manage. And the skill set required for that is very different to dealing with the local employer in your nearest town. But these guys, they need this sort of career path aspiration if they're going to stick around and develop into great assets for your companies. And then finally, for some, there's the notion of leading employer engagement. This is where you might be running a sales team or a team of employer solutions people across geographies or in a very large location, where you have a very functional responsibility to nurture and develop this team under your wing. And that's, again, a great career option if someone wants to be a leader and develop in that area. So there should be a different style of approach for whatever situation your consultant finds themselves in, whether they come in as a greenhorn, lots of sort of potential talent there, but haven't worked in employment services, probably just still trying to feel their way, through to very experienced people that are now able to lead a team to great performance. Excuse me. Any questions yet from the audience?
Hi, Paul. We had one that was more of an observation from Nigel Henry, who said that he recently saw a claim that you could increase salary quicker by job hopping, and surely employers need to address this. So I think that's a general observation on the sector as it is at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah. We've seen a lot of wage inflation in Australia, particularly with the changeover of contracts. So to address those kinds of learning needs and what individuals and their people managers are looking to do with their teams, we've been spending a few months thinking about how do we make learning an individual, very personal experience that also incorporates the leader and gives them a role to make sure they are also front and center in their individual's performance in terms of their training and ongoing application of the skill. We call this Learn at Prospert. It's a platform that houses learning content, and it's designed to be available anywhere, anytime. And it's also a global sort of solution as well. So let's explain what it does. Firstly, it breaks down the employer solutions role into a number of component steps. We call it our 7-step framework, and it provides tools and techniques for individuals to learn each step of the process thoroughly and don't skim over really important steps. It's designed to be self-paced and on demand. So self-paced, if you're new and you need to go over it 2 or 3 times, no problem. You can keep going back as often as you want until it sinks in. But if you're quite experienced and you sort of know a lot about this, but you're just looking for a bit of refinement in what you do, then you can quickly move through to what you're particularly interested in. We also incorporate a number of video anecdotes and other tips to help people digest the theory of the framework and how to go about creating employer solutions. These are we quote war stories of real people in the field that we've been mentoring and coaching over the years. And that helps the learner sort of understand that could be me, and that's kind of what I'm doing today. So it's good to know there are better ways to do things. Excuse me. There's also a lot of interactivity and assessment throughout the process. And the assessment doesn't require the learner to send in their results to us to give them the stamp of approval, but to talk them over, talk their results over with their line manager. So throughout the course, they get a case study workbook where they can choose some different job seeker types to sort of role play and do theoretical sort of employer solution work around. And there's also an employer who is part of this learner process where they work with a real life scenario of trying to get a particular job seeker into a job with this particular employer. And they've got to be able to show their line manager how they're performing, how they're progressing through the training. The other key difference in this solution is that we've factored in times for the learners to come together as a group with their peers to talk about specific parts of their learning. Excuse me, COVID's still hanging on, I think. We've got chances for them to discuss, typical things like I've practiced the technique for dealing with objections from employers. And this is what I found when I applied it in the real world, when I sat down with an employer and tried to get my job seeker a job. This is what I found. Can you give me some guidance as to what I might have done differently next time, for example? Or I've always struggled to ring an employer who I don't know, and I tried your technique, and 5 times out of 10 I was successful. I got through gatekeepers into a decision maker, and I've set up appointments. So it's a very positive. It's a nice way to socially engage the group as a group rather than individually, as well as reinforce the behaviors that you want them to be practicing. So if you're slipping behind a bit, behind your peers, you get this subtle pressure to keep up with the rest of them and do everything you can to catch up. As I said, there's lots of case studies and real life scenarios sprinkled throughout the learning so that it does feel very real, and it helps them think, I've got a job seeker just like that in my site. And I can just, I can work, I can imagine in my own head, how am I going to go about trying to get this person a job? And then finally, we've developed it in such a way so it's mobile ready in case you need to consult things at the last minute. Say you're about to walk into an employer meeting for the first time and you just want to remind yourself what you need to do at a certain part of that meeting. Now, the crucial thing too is that we need to be able to track return on investment for this solution, right? A lot of organizations don't want to just throw money at training or learning and then not have any way to measure, did this actually work for us? What were the results? So we've identified a set of leading and lagging indicators that we help our clients track as part of the rollout of this program. Firstly, the one thing you can measure straight away is the motivation and confidence within the team. Line managers will tell us, oh my God, whatever you guys have done, Johnny is walking differently into the office these days. He's talking differently. He's really excited to leave the site and get out there and meet employers. I can't believe the turnaround. That's an example of what we mean by that. And then secondly, Johnny's coming back with a record of some great meetings he's had, where he's learned so much more about businesses than he realized. And we never knew anything about these guys either. And so we've only ever scratched the surface, but he's really dug down and found out there's a lot more different ways we could help employer ABC than we realize with different types of job seekers. He's also coming back with more relationships that are brand new to us, right? We've always been strong in these particular industry sectors, but he's found that a lot of his job seekers want to work somewhere else. So he's gone off and found new relationships that he could target and nurture and develop into new clients for us as well. And these jobs are not just, casual work. These are truly sustainable placements. And I'll talk about Ted again shortly and what his attitude is when he talks to employers. And we've got this concept of an employer caseload now in our language. Our language has changed. We used to talk about our job seekers as our only caseload, but now we're talking about employers as our caseload as well. Because we need to have two. We need to have two in mind when we're thinking about our key stakeholders. And we need to be able to grow that caseload so we can give more choice and control to our job seekers in terms of where they wish to work. Naturally, great outcomes happen from these ever-growing relationships and ever-growing sustainable placements. So that achieves that ticks that box. And the other magic thing that happens is that all of a sudden, employers are contacting us. We don't have to even go out there and market that much anymore because our existing employers keep telling their mates how good we are, and we get all these inquiries coming into us. And these are not just the desperados that are looking for people to fill roles they've struggled to fill for 6 months. These are employers that are really appropriate for what we can do. And obviously our government stakeholders are ecstatic with what's going on as well. And they notice these things too. Now, those are more lagging indicators, but you can see that it doesn't take much to drive towards those crucial indicators and get people noticing. So I mentioned Ted earlier. How did he get to 250 employers? So this is how what he's done has worked in practice. So he's taken our 7-step framework, and this is the kind of things he was doing on a regular, consistent basis to get the results he got. Firstly, he only targeted, remember he was in the disability employment sector, he only targeted employers that were willing to consider hiring someone and keeping them on their books this time next year. So his mantra was, I will find you someone, Anton, I will find you someone that'll still be working for you this time next year. So psychologically, he was getting the employer thinking, oh my God, I better do everything I can to onboard this person really well, to provide the training they need so that they will want to stick around for a year or more, right? Everyone talks about people with disability being really loyal and taking less sick leave, etc. Well, I better put my money into this and make sure I'm doing everything I can to capitalize on that great attribute. He also used a lot of referrals. He used to always ask every employer he dealt with, who are your competitors, customers, key suppliers? Why would he even ask that? Because they would naturally say, oh, yeah, well, you know, our key suppliers just down the road, you should talk to them as well. How you've worked with us, I'm sure they could benefit too. So he was always looking for someone to introduce him to the next new business opportunity. And he was great with engaging gatekeepers. No gatekeeper would ever put Ted on hold or tell him, I'll get someone to call you back. He was always able to win them over. And there's a natural art in doing that, which we talk a lot about in our learning. Then when he had the meeting, it was usually on site, right? This is not sort of some keyboard meeting that he would have. He would actually go out and visit. And he would do it in an efficient way so that he could see 3 or 4 employers in a similar locality in one afternoon, for example. And more often than not, they'd say, let's go for a tour. I'll show you around the place. And in doing so, his radar was switched on, looking at the types of people working there, what types of work they did, what the environment was like. You know, you could almost picture his own customer working somewhere here, and he would be able to relay that back to his customer when he got to talk to them. The other key thing he did was listen. Listen for all the cues the employer was telling him about how painful it was to hire people these days, you know, using all the jobs boards and all these other ways of hiring that just drive them nuts most employers, particularly small business, hate recruiting, right? It's a real chore that they'd rather not have to do. So if Ted could come along with a solution, I'm here to be your HR business partner. And what small business wouldn't love that? The other thing about Ted, because he was naturally an extroverted person, he had to really make sure he didn't neglect the detail about jobs he was looking at. So in order to place the right customer or candidate into that role that might be available, he had to really probe fully on the details of that job, the work environment, what they were looking for as their, as their ideal candidate, etc. And more often than not, he could create a role that didn't exist. Right? In Australia, we call this job carving. I'm not sure what they call it in the UK, for example, but it's a great skill. When you're hearing the employer say, "Oh, I've got no time for this, and I wish I had another arm or leg to do this." Well, that's the perfect segue into start to talk about creating a 10-hour, 15-hour role for someone, and then that could lead to 30 hours or more. You never know. And he was great at that too. And then when he screened and put forward someone for a particular role, Ted always came back to the employer pain points and made sure when he presented someone for consideration, those pain points could be addressed straight away or with some training that he could potentially help with as well. So the employer naturally focused on their strengths or encouraged to focus on the candidate's strengths instead of, oh, what's wrong with what's their disability again and things like that. He was able to get them to stay not focusing on what they couldn't do, but what they actually could do to help solve those pain points. The other critical skill that Ted had was he could anticipate employer objections in advance of the conversation and have a strategy to deal with them on the spot and not sort of go back to the site going, oh, I wish I could have dealt with that question from the employer, would have had this deal done by now. No, he could confidently deal with them in the situation. And the respect he had from his employers in doing so was remarkable, and that would often lead to multiple placements with that one employer. And finally, one thing he really did really well was even if the employer was not hiring someone or had given Ted an extremely difficult role to fill, given the nature of his caseload, he would always stay in touch. He would say things like, Sandra, I'm still looking for that Boilermaker you wanted. I haven't given up yet. So Sandra, more often than not, would say, oh, that's all right, Ted. I trust you. I'm sure someone will turn up one day. So I'll hang in there and wait till you give me a call again. And so he'd make sure he just diarised to keep in touch. And in this way, he made sure that he was the exclusive employment service provider to those employers. He didn't let anyone get in the door trying to disintermediate the relationship. And he always asked for referrals, particularly for employers that were ecstatic with their service that he got from Ted. So that's one individual that we found has become an apostle of what we do, and we love him equally back. Now, looking at an organization, as mentioned earlier, I was going to give you a couple of case studies of some organizations that we've worked with. We were able to work with one in what we call our Job Active program, which is our mainstream employment service. It's since been renamed to Workforce Australia, a very creative name they've come up with for that one. This is a company that was a very mediocre performer, had a few areas in the country that weren't doing all that well, potentially could have had their license revoked. And so at the end of this exercise, they were able to double the number of high-performing regions they had in the country. And also their sites, their high-performing sites went up as equally amount. So what we did with them, we started with sales leadership. There was a real leadership deficit when it came to sales. Right? Most site managers we dealt with initially would run a mile, then talk about employer solutions. Right? It was just another language and they just couldn't understand it. They didn't know what their role should be. They didn't know how to coach. More often than not, they would pull out a baseball bat and beat their guys, figuratively, of course, to try and get more placements. And those placements would be pretty ordinary because people would be feeling under pressure all the time and not having enough time to get out there and do their job properly. So we had to work with them to get them to turn their attitude around and understand their role was really important and train them in how to do it properly. Then we lifted the sales capability. They had a lot of different salespeople around the country. I think it was over 50 or 60. And there was a couple of superstars who had high potential, but probably weren't getting the right direction and were sort of potentially spinning their wheels with the wrong types of employers. Plus, you had a whole bunch of people that had no clue what they were doing and just running around, driving around in cars, hoping that whatever employer they knocked on the door of would have a great vacancy for one of their job seekers. So we had to give them some direction and a framework and all these tools to make sure they all sort of sung from the same hymn sheet. They could obviously tailor it to their own local market, but at least they could have a common framework in which to improve on. And then finally, we looked at staff retention. Retention or attrition at that stage was absolutely killing them. They were above 50% at one point across the country. And so using this investment in training and coaching and mentoring that we're giving the team, it dramatically reduced their attrition rates. And so we got it down to 30% before we moved on in that project. And most of those people leaving were the poorly hired ones that shouldn't have been in the role in the first place. So that's the Job Active case study. The next one was a disability employment provider. Now, we got working with these guys right in the middle of the deepest, darkest part of COVID, right? When you probably remember that half the country was shut down and the other half was shutting us out. And so it was a bit of a challenge to get employees to even think about hiring people, let alone people with a disability. My God, what are you talking to me about for? Go away, call me in 6 months when I might still be in business. That was the type of typical reaction this client of ours staff were getting from local employers. So we had to work a fair bit to get them thinking beyond COVID and create a bit of a vision for the future. We took it out to about 3 years, and then we sort of worked back from there and pointed out that, there's some quick wins we can get in place, such as helping you improve your capability to engage employers, which can help you get back on track. We also looked at their marketing. Their marketing was all over the place, highly expensive, not delivering much at all in terms of quality leads. So we had to help them with that to make sure that they were attracting, good caseload from on one hand, and also the right types of employers on the other. And then we looked at their sales capability. And again, this was a relatively small team, so we spent a lot of time mentoring and coaching them as well. And we got some amazing results. Once again, another lady, she was a Korean migrant, and she was on the way out. Her team leader said she's hopeless, she's got to go, hasn't made any sales. And then with really dedicated, personalized mentoring, she became an absolute superstar, right? Just getting jobs everywhere, particularly in her sector, but all up and down the train line where she operated. So it was an amazing result. So there are two contrasting sort of case studies, one pre-COVID, one in COVID, one disability, one not, but equally sort of showcasing what you can do at an organization level if you sort of get everyone on the same train, have a common framework, common tools and techniques, and also support their leaders and make sure they're part of the journey and not just leaving it to the frontline employer solutions people. And that, my friends, is the end of my presentation. I'll let my voice rest for a moment and have a drink of water while I take your questions.
Thanks, Paul. That's great. Yeah, do that. I know what it's like to have a dry throat. So we've got a couple of questions. So the first one is relating to your initial case study with Ted, and it comes from Nigel Henry, who said, could you expand a little more around the 52-week outcome?
Yeah, so Nigel, in our contracts for disability employment, the government gives you an extra incentive to try and keep someone in work for 52 weeks. Plus, there's less administration on your part if you can find someone a role for that long, right? You don't have to keep going in and out of the system to update what new job they've got, etc. Now, what Ted would do, he'd be working very closely with his customers, his job seekers, to say, you know, is this something you could do for 52 weeks, right? I'm not forcing you into a role that you're not going to be comfortable doing for that length of time, right? You might have a career trajectory that goes beyond this role, but let's try and, you know, give you this full year's work experience so it enhances your chances of getting your career job, your preferred job. So, and also, you know, on the employer side, it was capitalizing on this disability customer and their willingness to, you know, get a job they like, you know, they really enjoy, and also, you know, and show their loyalty to that employer for, you know, that's decided to take them on. So that was his mantra. It was a dual mantra: one, working with the job seeker; two, working with the employer, and playing that classic broker role where he was trying to introduce two people to build a relationship that was going to last at least 12 months.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And it feeds really well into the values around sustainability as well. So we've got a question or a statement from Vidya. I'm just going to read this out. It's a long one. We've got, hi, Paul, thanks for the session. My background is in employer engagement. And I previously used to work in a college where before I came in, they didn't have many employer engagement or student engagement. Within my first year, I managed to secure around 650 placements, and we had a great feedback from Ofsted, which is our educational ombudsman in the UK, as this is the area the college needed to work on. I'm currently supporting my team and upskilling them in employer engagement, and what you have shared will help me to get the message across and will support me in enhancing my approach. So I just wanted to say a very big thank you. So that's fantastic.
You're welcome. Yeah. And Vidya, I'm happy to get an email from you or whatever as you when you're on your journey to, you know, share if you want to share anything and any questions and whatever.
That's great. And then we've got Dahlia has a question. She said, what incentives can an employer offer to maintain these well-trained staff once they are equipped with the commercial recruitment and consultant skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the incentive is, you know, there's loads of different ways you can reward and recognize, you know, these really talented staff. One of the things with most people in this kind of role, they love the recognition, right? It doesn't have to be dollars or pounds or euros or whatever it is you're paying these guys. They just want to be recognized, right? And so taking them, and there's ways to do that doesn't have to be a program, right? You can take them with you, you know, to go and see some large employers that, you know, helps them think, oh, this could be me one day, you know, with the right type of career path, you know, I could get to looking after these types of big employers. You could give them a role to be the local account manager for a large company where you can't spread yourself across, you know, multiple locations all at the same time. So you need, you know, a posse of people at the local level that can be your account manager on your behalf. So that's a great opportunity. I've done that before, and they really they love that idea of helping out that way. You can give them, you know, potential if you've got some this is a tricky one to do, but if you've got some labour hire type organisations, you might second them for a month or two to work inside the labour hire as your implant, right? They're still working for you, but if there's an organisation that gives you plenty of work, and it'd be helpful from the relationship point of view for you guys to sit side by side and learn about each other's business and learn a better way of working together. That'd be another great opportunity for someone to experience the world outside of your area as well. Plus, there's the other notion of cross-program skilling and other things like special projects, working on bids. If you're bidding for a new contract or a grant, get them involved. They'll often have some really creative ways that you could, put a spin on your pitch, so to speak.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. We've got another question from Brendan. It says that, to what extent do you think employers respond to relationships at a local or work advisor level as opposed to a more centralized employer engagement approach?
It depends on the business. I think local employers, like I said earlier about TED, if you can portray yourself as the local employer's HR business partner, they will elevate you to the same level as their accountant, their solicitor, their IT expert, right? None of these people work for the employer, by the way, right? They're too small to have their own sort of accountants, etc. But they will put you alongside, they'll put you on the same level because you are an essential part of their business now, right? The fact that you provide a whole range of services relating to HR is fantastic for them, right? They don't have to, go out and hire someone with those skills who they only need from time to time. So I think they really do value that relationship. And particularly with hiring people with certain barriers where they've not hired someone like that before, if you can then provide that value-added post-placement support where you can, show a lot of empathy with that employer and help them, navigate their way through some challenges that they might find, but keep your individual on, then they'll repay you in loads of ways. And one of the best ways they'll show that is by giving you referrals. So I would never neglect a local employer, even though you might only think, they're only going to be worth, one placement a year, for example, but you don't know who they're connected to, right? They could have siblings or relatives in business that they're happy to refer you to. They could be mates down the golf club or, the soccer team they follow. They could be telling them about your service. So before you know it, you can really grow quite a lot of different business relationships that way.
That's great. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have at the moment, Paul. Unless anyone's got anything else they want to say, even if it's just comments on the session itself. From my own perspective, Paul, it's been really insightful. Dali has said this has been really interesting and a very helpful session. Margaret has also said, thanks, Paul. This has been really useful. And it is nice to see the different messages around the change in approach to employer solutions, to look at the whole holistic approach to working with stakeholders and not just about that sales tactic version. So that's great. Vidi has also said thank you, and Idil, thank you, Paul. It's been very informative. So some lovely responses there. Great, thank you. And it's been great taking your questions, and thanks for your time and your your attention. And like I said, happy to take an email from anyone. You've got my contact details there. And if you ever in this part of the world, or I'm in your part of the world, I'd love to come out and see you guys in action if that's possible. And just, I guess, a final point I'd make is, the framework and the engagement philosophy we've been talking about a lot today resonates everywhere I go. So I was in a world conference of public employment services earlier this year in Estonia, of all places, and there were people from Slovenia, there were people from France and Germany and Holland and
Lithuania, etc., and they all have a similar sort of challenge to engage employers. But finding, the worldwide labour shortage as a big advantage, but equally employers are not going to roll over and just sort of take whoever you're going to throw at them. You've obviously got to do the hard work to build that relationship, win that trust, and then they'll start to reciprocate in ways that you can only imagine. Similarly, in the US, we're working with a disability service there, and their staff are saying the same kind of things that we're hearing from our New Zealand clients, as well as some of the similar questions to what you guys have raised today. So you're in good company. That's why I love this part of the business. I think what you do in employer solutions is the best part of these contracts. I think you get to help businesses thrive and grow so that they can hire more people and they can reinvest in their local communities, which is one of the great things about this whole employment services area.
Thanks, Paul. And yeah, there's a lovely comment from Doug that I have to mention. He says, as someone who's been involved in the disability employment for over 30 years, I wish we'd had your advice earlier on in my career. So,
okay. Thanks, Doug. That's great to hear. Thank you.
So it looks like it's been very much enjoyed, Paul. We'll bring the session to a close. And just to reiterate to everybody that we will be uploading this up to our channel. So if you feel you could pass this information on to anyone who was not able to attend today, and I personally do think it's very valuable, get them to search for the Institute of Employability Professionals channel on YouTube, not just IEP. And for those of you that are around next week, we have the very lovely David Imber, who's next week on Wednesday, and his topic is motivation and action planning, pulling levers or twisting arms, and he's a very popular speaker of ours, so we look forward to that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, Paul, and take care and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, guys. Do well.